back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I love these segments we're about to have with Chris Pika from Blog and Tackle out on Twitter, and sometimes WNST contributor. And the reason I love him is because Chris is back in Baltimore now. So we're going to start zooming. We're going to start having some crabs and crab cakes together from time to time. But when I talk about Baltimore Positive, Chris Pika, you actually moved back here to be part of this madness so that you can, I don't know, watch the Orioles on TV when they put them on exhibition games and time to but you're back in Baltimore. You even got a little taste of the Baltimore humidity on Sunday night, didn't you? Huh?
Yeah, Georgia was hot, but the thing is, Georgia, we never went outside, as much. I mean, it was just tough to do it. Here, you don't mind being outside until it gets to be about 100, 105 in the heat index, and then you're just wondering why you stepped outside in the first place.
Who was the actress in that sultry scene that said, "You got me hotter than Georgia asphalt"? Do you remember that scene?
I do not.
Really? There was I'm going to find out an actress back in the 90s. She said, "You got me hotter than Georgia asphalt." And so I'm going to go find that. But Georgia asphalt's pretty hot, and we got heat this week. But for me, the biggest heat now in the football world, not whether the college players are going to play, whether baseball is going to play, because they are. I mean, clearly they're going to start a baseball season. But the football players are finally heard from on Twitter over the weekend, right? Like, we haven't heard much about that. We've heard John Harbaugh saying, "Oh, my God, how are we going to play under these rules?" Now we actually have the players, and, whether Lamar's mother wants to live with Lamar, if Lamar's going to work and is going to come home with COVID, right? I am fascinated to hear the other side of this because the baseball fight was ugly. It was out in the open. It was there for everybody. How do the players feel about coming back? And how do their pregnant wives feel? Now we're gonna learn where the rubber meets the road for the NFL this week, right?
It is, and I think the first, I wouldn't say shot across the bow, but the first real piece of news was late last week. My group at the Pro Football Writers of America, I'm the communications director for, they held a Zoom call with NFLPA President DeMaurice Smith and the president of the NFLPA, J.C. Treader. And basically they went over some of the concerns of the players and the union going into training camp and what they know and what they don't know. They're trying to figure out from their doctors and medical practices and how the league is going to handle eventual outbreaks or eventual positive tests and how all this kind of takes place.
I love how you use the word eventual, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, if you're not going to be in a true bubble, and I think most everyone knows that, the NHL and the NBA are conducting their remaining seasons and playoffs in what is essentially a true bubble. They've bought out hotels adjacent to arenas, and the players are sequestered as much as possible with incredibly limited interaction with anyone who's not inside that bubble themselves. A friend of mine worked a tournament, the basketball tournament, which is a winner-take-all tournament that was played in Columbus, Ohio. He was in a bubble with the players of those teams for about 2.5 weeks. They were tested. He was
bubble
tested
meaning
himself.
You don't leave, you don't go kiss girls, you don't go out to the supermarket, you don't go pump gas, you don't run out for fried chicken, you don't do anything.
Yep, he was in that bubble for 2.5 weeks. He was one of the staff members working the event. I asked him, kind of how many times he was tested. He said he was tested 7 times over the course of the 2 weeks. There were positive tests among the players, but those were coming from the outside and coming in, and those teams were disqualified from the tournament. The bigger story was once everyone was inside, there was only 3 positive tests over the 2.5 weeks inside the bubble. So from that standpoint, you can see it will work. The NBA will see how that's going to happen. They had a bunch of tests as people were coming from the outside, entering into the bubble. And the NHL, I'm sure, will go through the same thing. The difference here for baseball and to our discussion, football, is that there is no bubble here. Players are going to be responsible. Everything once they get to their team facilities, whether it's in Owings Mills or Minnesota or New York or Dallas or Miami, that environment will be as pristine as possible. The NFL and the teams have worked very, very hard to having those areas, the tiers, it's players and coaches are tier 1. staffers that may have to have access to players on occasion are tier 2. All of these different protocols are in effect. Baseball doing the same thing, and obviously hockey and basketball also doing the same. The one thing that they cannot control, and that's is going to be the key factor, is going to be what happens when they leave the team facility after practice or camp practice. The players are on their own at that point. They're with their families. They may decide, hey, I want to go out to dinner with teammates somewhere or grab a beer somewhere. There are things that go on that every time you step outside and you expose yourself to a group of people who may or may not be wearing masks, may not be doing social distancing, you are opening yourself up to getting the virus and bringing it inside the team facility. And so that's the one thing that the NFL and the players union and the teams, that's the great unknown. That's the X factor here, is what happens. And they're talking about, well, is it going to be testing every day, which is a saliva test, a less invasive nose test? Is it going to be every day, every other day? And there's a lot of protocol things that they have to figure out prior to the opening of camps. And at this point, I'm not completely convinced that camp is going to start on time. I think there's going to be some movement on the amount of preseason games. I think the league may wind up going to one preseason game as opposed to their more preferred two, because they want to give every team a chance to do their basically a run through of what their policies and procedures are going to be at the stadiums. In a one game preseason, they won't be able to do that. So there are a lot of question marks right now. And there are a lot of teams that just aren't sure. The NFLPA has to sign off on all of these plans that are put forth by the clubs as to how they're going to mitigate the virus in their facilities. So that's going a little bit slower probably than I think the league would like. So there's just a lot of questions.
Not to mention the amount of testing they're going to have to do and whether the tests are going to be available, right?
That's right, and whether the tests can come back in 24 to 48 hours. I mean, where does that happen? So there's a lot of unknowns right now. I mean, you had a player on the call last week talk about the fact that somebody went out to lunch and his entire family got it, including him. And so those are the types of things that can happen. Those are not one-offs. That's something that could happen to any of us walking outside and being in any group of people anywhere. We're not doing social distancing. We're not washing our hands. We're not keeping distance. All the things that we've been preached to and told for the last 4 months. And then you're going to have players that are basically going to have bodily contact. They're going to be in the huddle with each other. So if someone tests positive, they're wearing things that allow them to contact trace a lot easier. But what happens when the contact tracing is your offensive line? What happens if it's the star quarterback and he gets sick? How do you field a team? How do you take care of the things you have to do in order to play? I think the NFL has proven that with the draft, they are not. They want to go full speed ahead. They went full speed ahead at the draft, considering a lot of people said, this may be not something you want to do, and the owners are bound and determined at this point that this season started on time.
He is Chris Pika. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. You might know him from Mount St. Joe or from Loyola or from parts of the Saints or the Falcons, and certainly the life of Michael Jordan and riding the bus. That was the Super Bowl of the year, right? The Michael Jordan thing that you were a small part of, and ESPN. That if we don't get back on the field, that was the highlight of the whole year.
Probably, yes.
Well, we're going to get back on the field on the baseball side, right? And you came from Atlanta where people were gathering. Now you're back in Baltimore. You live 10 blocks from the ballpark. You can't even go back to the ballpark. They're going to play games. I got to tell you, Chris, you've watched a lot of baseball. You watch a lot of bad baseball, good baseball, minor league baseball. You've been in trucks. You've been doing this as long as I've been doing this, much more on the inside in your minor league baseball background. I'm sure you were at some games where there weren't a lot of people, or where it's late at night or after a rain delay and there's 300 people in some minor league. We've all seen that. We've all been a part of that. I watched baseball Saturday and Sunday, and I literally turned to my wife and I said, "Look, I've lived baseball my whole life. My last name's Aparicio. I'm in the sports business. I don't know how people are going to stay with this for 3 hours." I mean, they're in the broadcasting business, right? Like, so the sequestering of announcers and no Jim Palmer and Gary, I'll hear all of that, but I don't know how they're going to make it compelling from a noise, sit there for 3 hours. And maybe for some of the nerds like you and me will sit and watch it. Maybe there'll be people who, maybe the Orioles will win 5 of their first 6 games and make it interesting for a couple. I don't know. It's only an 8-week season, right? But so everything about it feels like a little bit of an exhibition unto itself. I really do wonder what is going to make my wife allow me to leave that on for 3 hours every night when there's been a wide, wide world of other things to watch. And if you're not really compelled by a pennant race or a player or your team and your team's ability to win, that there's something about it, it's not a great product from a television standpoint based on the other things that the 57 channels that I have access to. And that's the thing I'm worried the most about. If it's a television-only product, it's not a very good product.
Well, listen, I mean, you know that I'm a soccer fan. I'm a Tottenham Hotspur supporter and have been for a lot of years. And I've watched almost every Tottenham match since they've come back on TV. And so when you watch those games on NBC or any of the Premier League games, especially on the television broadcast, they're pumping in crowd noise, which is just sort of more of a buzz. It's not very loud. It's just sort of there. I think it's more maybe for the help the announcers sort of, because it's hard when you're in a stadium that's flat and there are no fans. And I work in TV where there is a good amount of, especially in the spring, baseball and softball are done remotely with the announcers in a studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the games may be played at the University of Georgia. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in the TV booth in Athens and where the announcers would be sitting, and I'm doing stats or I'm telling them, hey, so-and-so's up in the bullpen or somebody's, they've got a pinch hitter on deck. And you're relaying that information, and the announcers kind of sound a little bit flat because they don't have that sort of, they can't feed off the crowd. They can't feed off the excitement of what's going on.
I guess that's my point. There is no excitement to anything going on. You know what I mean?
For soccer, for me as a supporter, I enjoy watching it. I get excited and enjoy it. But soccer is an action sport all of the time. So to your point in baseball,
and Dundalk, we wouldn't have said that back in the day, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like the Baltimore and both of us would say, "Hey, soccer, you're already boring. You love boring things. Soccer's boring." You know what I mean? Like I've been hearing that on the radio most of my life, right? Other than my Blast friends and my Pete Caringi friends and my World Cup friends, and I've been around the world chasing soccer games, right? So I hear what you're saying, but there is a point when you really think about it, the ball always is moving in soccer, right?
Correct.
Like in baseball, it really is very, very station to station. And, football is too, from a stop-start perspective of the game lasting all of 7 minutes of actual real time, right, in the 60 minutes of its play. Mm-hmm. But baseball is different, and the sounds of baseball are part of it for any of us who still love it. I'm wondering, how does this ever attract anybody new? Like people have never seen baseball. Put it, oh man, this is great. There's no noise. There's no nothing. It stops. There's no activity. There's no fan. This is really a tough sell for me, especially being an Oriole fan, knowing how bad the team is. This is going to be a tough sell around here for 8 weeks, I think.
It could be. I look at what ESPN did with the Korean Baseball League, the early morning games that they've done where the announcers were at home, basically calling it from their living rooms or from their offices or whatever. And what we saw a little bit of, what little I did watch, to be fair, I didn't watch a lot of it just because of the teams involved, and I really care. But I looked more just at production values. And you may get more of sort of the running sort of commentary about other things that are going on in the game, not necessarily that hardcore balls and strikes, just more of a conversation as the game goes on, rather than that in order to try to keep people tuned into the broadcast. I think if you do,
that's sports radio. Then you're asking for a different skill set, right? Like literally. Right. You're asking for John Miller and Jim Palmer to get together and talk and tell jokes. That's what it should have always been. The Orioles broadcast the last 20 years have been horrific because there has not been that sense that we grew up with of community and jokes and fun and all. And I don't. It's just missed the mark. I've been complaining about it forever. They've really been lacking that, and they've tried new voices, and they brought new voices in, and we're going to hear different voices this year, right? Like, that's one thing. Palmer's not going to be doing it, and there is this, well, who is that broadcasting? I think Ben McDonald could be really good at this. I mean, we're going to find out. You're going to hear more of it, right?
Right, and Ben had some other things going on. I mean, he is a constant voice on the SEC network, doing their Thursday night game of the week in college baseball. Also does a lot of LSU non-conference games. And so
just a hell of a guy. Ben McDonald's is good. When I go back to him being a number 1 overall, and him coming out of the bullpen that night and where he is, I can spend an evening with Ben McDonald. I like Mike Bordick. I didn't think he's a very good broadcaster because there's no criticism. If there's no criticism, you're a shill. If you're a shill, I don't want to listen. It's just where it is. And I've loved Mike Bordick forever, but that network has the amount of orange smoke that has been needed to be a part of that to please Mr. Angelos. We're seeing the government being run this way, Chris, has been very difficult. I don't know what that means for Ben McDonald. I don't know what his season of that. I mean, Palmer never cared, right? So Palmer was always sort of the best part of the broadcast by far. But I mean,
I think Gary Thorne was very underrated as the Orioles play-by-play. I think Gary's tremendous at that, in that role. I think he was very good. I think he and Palmer are so comfortable with one another. They're obviously contemporaries age-wise, and Gary's got a snide sense of humor. Palmer obviously, has a memory like a steel trap, and I think I enjoyed those two calling games.
Yeah, a bad game in a bad season.
I'm not a fan of Bordick as an announcer, and certainly, I was not a Jim Hunter fan of any sort as far as TV or radio. So, I mean, you're my company. I'm putting you on for 3 hours. I understand you're making it for everybody, not for me. And I've been watching broadcasts forever. Chris, I know what's good and I know what's bad. And I'm telling you, what I saw over the weekend, and this is no knock on my buddy Robbie Inch Mikowski, who I tuned in to watch because he was on. I mean, my wife and I are sitting there watching the Indians and the Pirates play for no one on a Saturday night. This is what my life has become, Chris, during a pandemic, okay? And I heard a familiar voice, and I said, that's Robbie, I said, let's listen to that. And I said to her, Robbie's good at this because it's sports radio at this point. You're trying to get to know the players. I don't know who the hell any of these guys are. I'm watching the Pirates and the Indians. So at least he's giving me a little bit of a story and this and that and whatever. It needs to be storytelling, and it needs to be funny, and it needs to be engaging, and it needs to be interesting, and it needs to be that every night. That is, I'm a guy that's done radio for 30 years. For the people that like me, they tune in. I try to make my guests compelling. I try to make everything I do better moving forward. That's the realm I'm in because that's all I've got. That's all they've got right now because they don't have a very good game. They don't have a very good product. They don't have very good players. They need to make the broadcast good, and I hope Ben McDonald is the Tony Romo of, you know what I mean? Well, I think they did a good move, and I'll be very interested, and I'm looking forward to hearing and watching Jeff Arnold as the play-by-play. And for those,
I don't even know who the hell he is. I've never heard of him.
Well, he worked in the minor league system with the Orioles. Was the announcer.
He's the CEO of ShareCare, Jeff.
Yeah.
Oh, different Jeff. I'm sorry.
But he knows these minor league guys and knows these players are going to move up to the major league roster and be that core of the Orioles in a couple of years very, very well. So
I'm a jerk. I spelled his name wrong. He spells it like the Jeffrey from Toys R Us. Geoff. I'm sorry.
Right.
Jeff on the air. So there you have it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it'll be interesting because he knows a lot of those younger players because he was around them every day in the minor leagues. I think it's an interesting look. I've worked with Kevin Brown, in the spirit of disclosure. I've worked with Kevin on football broadcasts for ESPN. I like Kevin. He's a different taste. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Jeff can do, Melanie Newman and others. It's not going to be Thorne and Palmer, and we're going to miss that. But listen, it's 60 games, and it's a new experience for everybody. I mean, you're going to have announcers in the majors having to do things that announcers at ESPN, especially in the college space, have had to do for the last 6 or 7 years. And that's call games from the studio, call games off of a monitor. The ESPN does that a lot, especially in college basketball and, as I said, in spring sports. Now you're asking, announcers not to be on site, and you're kind of blind because you don't have the information you find out when you're at the ballpark every day. And then you're calling games off of a monitor, and you have to sound excited, and you're going to call every home and road game from that same booth every night. So it's going to be interesting to see how a lot of the announcers work with. I mean, it's
Chris, you would admit, like, doing play-by-play is really, really hard. I'm a guy that's done radio for 30 years. People have always said to me, "Oh, you always wanted to be John Miller." I'm like, no, actually, I wanted to be a writer. I never even thought about doing radio until I started doing it and trying to figure out how to do it. And what I figured out really early on is play-by-play is an art form that I say to people all the time, I'm missing a finger, right? Chris, I could learn to play the guitar. Like, I've taken lessons. I could play the guitar. I would really struggle with the piano. You know what I mean? Like, certain things you're good at, certain things. Play-by-play is an art form unto itself that is incredibly difficult to do. So difficult that I don't think I could ever even be remotely competent at doing it, even if I tried hard and I really wanted to do it. And then thinking about doing that off of a television from far away with less information, where you are you're asking a lot of these people. You really are. And I think that being my point, which is the games don't matter, the team doesn't matter, the players don't matter. The only thing that matters is it's coming into your living room and whether you leave it on or not. And the only way you're going to leave it on is if it's interesting.
I think so. And I think, as TV is running out of things to put on that are not reruns at this point, obviously live sports of any type will bring ratings. And I think people also understand that. And, it's a grand experiment. This is also going to be that way in the NBA. It's going to be that way in the NHL, a lot of off-site calling of games. The announcers aren't going to be inside the bubble unless you're the major network announcers. So it's going to be a different experience for all of us, regardless of what sport you watch. I mean, if you watch any golf, you've got Jim Nantz, who's actually on site, but everyone else is calling it off of monitors at different places in Orlando and all over the country in some cases. So the key to it is your producers and directors making it sound and look seamless and making sure that the information's getting in the ears of the announcers. And I've worked in enough trucks where your producer is in the ear of your announcer trying to give him information or trying to set him up to say things. Those are the real MVPs, the people that no one sees. Those are the ones that are going to make this go over the course of a season. In any sport, and how these games are presented, and how it looks to the viewer at home, and how it sounds to the viewer at home.
All right, brother. Well, glove up, mask up, cool off, stay inside. I know you got that outdoor grill here in Baltimore. And it sounds all sexy till it's 103, bro, at 7:15, and all of a sudden those steaks sound better on a Foreman. So
yes, they do. Yes, they do.
I must say, on a full disclosure basis, my wife and I have been going to the farmers market. It's one of our favorite things to do in the city for well over a decade. Before she had cancer, quite frankly, way before then, actually. So we've been enjoying the summer corn and the peaches and the heirloom tomatoes and the fresh vegetables and all the fresh fruits and all that stuff. But to run into you and your wife at 7:38 in the morning on a Sunday morning, it makes it feel like you're really back in Baltimore, Pika. So, it's not just this phone relationship anymore. I like it.
It's good. It's good to be a part of the city. It's good to enjoy what the city has to offer, and I think what happens down there every Sunday underneath the JFX, I think is a tremendous part of living in the city, and we certainly enjoyed it.
Well, stop by. We'll walk over when it's not 104 together, when I don't have to bring home a watermelon for Dennis Colazzos. Okay?
Sounds good.
Gold watermelons are in. Don't tell Dennis. I'm testing the first one to make sure it's up to his standards, because Dennis and I.
That's very important to test.
Yeah, you got to test the waters. I'm going to let you do that with baseball.
Sounds good.
Chris Pika, blog and tackle and WNST contributor in my life, first friend I ever met in media. True story. Gave me my first tour of the Baltimore News American back in 1984. I am Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We are AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore, calm, local, and always Baltimore, positive.